Federal law enforcement agencies are reportedly paying millions to track the movement of people's cell phones. And according to the technology website Protocol, they're doing it by using a software tool that accesses data from popular cell phone apps, mobile apps. A story that they published yesterday details a U.S. government's contracts with Virginia-based company Babel Street. The company's Locate X app allows law enforcement to track your cell phone's movements depending on where you've traveled. And several federal agencies are also using the app. It's creating ethical and legal concerns. Protocol senior reporter Charles Levinson wrote that story, and he joins me now on set. Charles, thanks for joining us on this story. First up, what is Locate X and how exactly are they using it?
Yeah, Locate X is a software platform. They take data, location data from mobile apps, common mobile apps, and they sell it in a platform to law enforcement agencies, ICE, CBP, U.S. Secret Service, and it allows these agents to basically draw a geofence around a plot of land, an address, and then look at all the devices, mobile devices that are associated within that fence that they've drawn, and then pull up historical location data for those devices going back months, a year. They can see where that device has been.
Now, my understanding was there was a 2018, as you wrote in the story, Supreme Court ruling that said you can't just take someone's cell phone information and use it, that you need to have a search warrant. It's like your property, right?
Right. So that was relating to cell towers.
Cell towers, okay.
From Verizon and things like that. And in that case, they said you need a warrant to access this. And so the government said, well, okay, well, we'll buy it from apps. And so that hasn't been tested by the courts yet. So we don't know whether the Supreme Court or whether courts would say the same legal principles that apply to cell towers apply to cell apps. But obviously there are some similarities.
So Charles, taking the flip side of this, if I'm law enforcement, I'm saying, look, we just had a bombing happened. I want to literally put a digital fence around that area, see who's in contact. Could they have been in contact with people in other countries that could be problematic? Right. What's the ethical issues here, though, on the other side?
Well, the ethical issues are just that this is data that the courts have said, are protected by the Fourth Amendment, that law enforcement needs a warrant to get that sort of information about individual citizens, and now what we're seeing is they've found a way around that process, that legal process, by simply saying, well, it's available for sale on the commercial market, so we'll just buy it instead of going through the legal process with the judicial review and the judicial sort of scrutiny of law enforcement.
And you say in this article that Babel Street has kept Locate X pretty secret. Why is that?
So they have the terms in their contract, which we got our hands on, that actually requires agencies that buy this product from them to agree to not even mention this technology's existence in any court proceedings and warrants and subpoenas and anything. And what that does is it prevents the courts from ever getting a chance to even know it exists to rule on it. So part of the reason we don't know whether the courts would back up the ruling, the Supreme Court ruling in Carpenter that we mentioned, is because they haven't had a chance to rule on it because it's been kept out of the courts because of these secrecy provisions.
So because of what you're saying, these connections with government channels, could that bring up legal problems down the road? So
there's another, so the answer is yes. And there's another, the current privacy legislation that sort of governs this is an old law, 1986, right? So obviously a lot has changed since then. But part of that 1986 law, called the Stored Communications Act, forbids any company that provides electronic communications to the public from sharing data on those customers with the government, right? So all these apps that are passing on this data to data brokers, which are then passing it on to another data broker, which are then selling it to the government from places like Babel Street. In theory, now that those app developers know that this data is winding up in the government's hands, it's possible that that they could be facing some sort of legal liability under the Stored Communications Act. We don't know. This hasn't been tested, right? But ACLU lawyer Nate Wessler, who argued Carpenter before the Supreme Court successfully, this is issues that he's been raising, and his opinion obviously carries some weight.
But when you look at the contracts that they've been able, it's spiked over the past few years, no?
Yeah. So they actually they have another product that sort of tracks social media. It does sort of social media analytics, and they rolled out the location data technology in 2017. Then in 2016, they did about $64,000 in fresh federal contracts, not a lot. 2017, they do over $2 million. By 2018, they're doing over $5 million. So the minute they rolled out this location tracking technology, their federal contracts spiked, and the people driving those contracts were ICE, CBP, U.S. Secret Service, and actually the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security. So
when you stand back and you look at this overall, what's your biggest concern with the way this is being run?
That basically there's no transparency, no regulation, no law, no anything about how our data is being used once it's passed on, right? So, you and I might be comfortable with our data being taken so we get a better advertisement or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean we're comfortable with that data being sent to law enforcement. But there's no visibility on that. Once your data gets passed to a marketer to get you a good advertisement, if that advertiser then sells it to another data broker, who sells it to another data broker, who sells it to the government, who sells it to whoever,
right.
You have no visibility of that. They're allowed to do whatever they want, and they don't have to tell you.
And there's no way right now for anyone to protect themselves.
Right.
All right. Charles Levinson's fascinating story. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.